Welcome, everyone, to the fourth and final session of TMF Week Day 3. My name is Oliver Pierce. I am your host today, although I will be doing very little talking, which might be pleasant for some. I'm going to pass it over to my great panel who are going to be talking all about TMF health oversight and metrics today. But before we jump into that, and I allow them to introduce themselves, just some quick housekeeping. So we get this all the time. Yes, the sessions will be recorded. They are actually going to be available at the end of the conference, not at the end of the day. So all those recordings from previous days and even from today will be available at the end of business on Friday. So something perhaps to catch up on over the weekend or next week. All attendees will receive a certificate of attendance, whether you attend one session or multiple. You'll get it for the entire conference, not for each session. Questions will be answered at the end of each presentation, but today we don't have a presentation, it's a panel. So please ask your questions throughout the session, and our panelists will be answering those as we go. Quick sort of highlight on the timeline. We actually, in fact, have a 60-minute panel discussion where we'll be going through all of the different subjects. The panel discussion today is called Monitoring Your TMF Vital Signs, TMF Health Oversight and Metrics. And with that, I will hand it over to Dawn, who I believe was here a minute ago, but has now left, conveniently, to lead the panel. She's coming back, guys, I promise. I see her in the backstage. Oh, here we go.
Sorry, my camera died, so I just flipped in and out really quick. But hello, everyone. Are we ready to go?
We're ready to go.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Yes, thank you for the introduction and, technical difficulties, par for the course, right? All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Welcome back to the last session for the day, TMF Week. I am super excited to have this panel with us. I am Dawn Niccum. I am the Executive Vice President for QA and Compliance at InSeption Group. And I don't even know how many TMF weeks I've done. However many they've had, that's how many I've done. Is this like the fourth one, third, fourth one, something like that? Great to be here. Oh, it's a fifth one. Oh my gosh, fifth one. I can't believe it. Wow. So very excited to be back and very excited to have this panel of experts. We are gonna talk around TMF health and a little bit about metrics and then a lot about oversight and partnerships. And we have the best panel here. So I am going to let the panelists introduce themselves and then we will go there. So Steph, if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I am Steph Viscomi. It is a pleasure to be here. I also have participated in past TMF weeks. It is an excellent conference to attend as a TMFer or non-TMFer. I've been in the industry for over 18 years. Majority of it is TMF, CROs, sponsors, all different sizes. Led teams and worked across many different vendors. So this is a really cool topic for me to join with this amazing panel. So I'm excited to move forward and listen in.
Fantastic. JP.
Thanks, Dawn, and hi, everyone. Also very happy to be here. And I think I've been on almost every TMF week here, at least 4 of them so far. So always a great event each year. So thanks to Oliver and the Montreal team for putting this together. The Director of Document Management at Advanced Clinical, oversee all of our TMF activities. I've been in the industry for roughly 20 years. I stopped keeping an exact count of years now. It's too many, but this is honestly one of my favorite topics, anything to do with TMF health and oversight, especially from a CRO perspective. So I'm looking forward to this session.
Great. Jason.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Weinstein. I'm the head of TMF operations at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. This is actually my first TMF week, so I'm excited to be participating. I have about 13 or 14 years in the industry and about just under 10 years of experience in the TMF. So excited to talk about oversight and metrics and all that fun stuff.
Fantastic. And Sarah, last but not least.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Dean, Executive Director in Precision for Medicine for eTMF. I also oversee CTMS as well. Again, it's been 20+-ish years, like JP, I kind of stopped counting. CRO, some pharma, worked a lot with the big pharma around here when I was on the CRO side, very big into metric reporting. So I'm just excited to be here to talk through it with these other colleagues as well.
I love how these guys stopped at 20 years. I did that for a while. Then I stopped at 25, and now I'm stopping at 30. So we'll see. Maybe that's where I stop permanently. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. All right. So I want to start out with a question and I'm going to pose this to Steph and Jason. First is, tell me what you're doing for oversight, just real briefly from your side. What kind of activities are you doing as a sponsor and, in your roles as a sponsor to ensure oversight of your TMF? Jason?
Steph, do you want to go first? Or
Yeah, go for it, Jason.
Okay, I'll go first. So we have a couple different things that we do, right? I would say, first off, everything that I'm going to rattle off here is listed in our TMF plan as ways that we have oversight over our vendors and studies. We have, like I hope most of you do, we have a QC process. That's all the documents coming in, or a majority of the documents coming in get QC'd. They have to meet our certain standards and requirements. We then have some what we call an inspection readiness review, which is like that post-approval review. All these activities are done either by the study team or somebody who is an expert at documentation. We then have what we call a TMF health scorecard. And the scorecard is basically a variety of metrics that all roll up into either single scores or kind of timeliness or completeness-based scores, depending on how you want to slice up all that data. And all these different metrics we use basically to oversee the different activities that are happening, either document QC, the inspection readiness review, or expected document lists for completeness. It's really kind of a whole oversight package for us, is really these metrics.
Great, Jason. What do you do differently, Steph?
Well, we do obviously a bit of the same. So number one, of course, we have most of this documented in our TMF plan, such as any kind of quality review. Maybe there's a secondary QC right up front as the doc's getting uploaded, and then onto a periodic review throughout the duration of the trial to do that check-in. But there's also our metrics, which are really important. So there's one set that can be utilized as a monthly metrics. So our TMF lead would send those to the study teams and work with our study teams to review those and be engaged with our study teams on those monthly metrics. And then there's, of course, a higher level that with our leadership, we want to ensure they're having a watchful eye and understanding of what's happening on the TMFs themselves. And would like to more talk about that kind of higher level, having committees in place, talking about the TMFs on two different levels. One, study specific levels. Maybe there's a high priority study, one that's upcoming for inspection, to keeping them engaged and aware, as well as our functions, but also to ensure having that kind of cross-functional higher level view of the TMFs and having that oversight. So there's many different ways to look at TMFs from an oversight perspective.
Yeah. And we do have a question before I flip over to JP and Sarah, because I do want to hear from the CRO side. But there was a question for Jason. It's in the chat about what you use for inspection readiness review. Before you go there, I have a new term that I'm coining. I picked it up from someone, but I'm coining it. And it's about inspection steadiness. And I think that's one thing. And when I heard that, it really hit me of, inspection readiness to me tends to be a little bit more of the last minute kind of stuff that gets done, right as we know an inspection is announced or we're anticipating it because of a marking application. But, I think a lot of the activities we're doing is more around inspection steadiness. How do we ensure that our TMF is always ready for an inspection? So, Jason, did you have any thoughts on what you might use for inspection readiness review?
Yeah, happy to provide just a little bit of detail on that. So it is an ongoing process. It happens every quarter after first patient, first visit. So we do think of it really as a ongoing activity that I hope gives us that inspection steadiness, as you said. But it is a workflow. It's got a couple different pieces, but there's a risk-based approach where the end users or the study team go in and review a subset of the documents based on their expertise. We also have some maintenance checks, like making sure that expired documents are getting updated at the right time, or that things that are marked as a living document are seeing a new version on a periodic basis. And then lastly is a completeness check that's either driven by a couple of reports that we generate or ad hoc, depending on the function and their need.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. All right, so I want to shift a little bit, because certainly, and even my organization, we do have oversight. And I think on the CRO or vendor side, we're maybe looking more at the partnership with our sponsors. So it may differ per sponsor, at least in my instances, it may differ. And it's really a conversation. And I do love that. I think both Jason and Steph said, documented in the TMF plan, because really, to me, that's the agreement piece. JP, what do you think about that? How have you done that, and how have you ensured that oversight is happening from your sponsor side, as well as some internal oversight you might do?
Yeah, and like you said, Dawn, it does vary from sponsor to sponsor, but obviously we document everything in the TMF plan as well. We kind of have our baseline set of metrics and KPIs. We also use, similarly to what Jason said, we take a bunch of that data, roll it up into a TMF health score on a regular basis, share that with all the sponsor organizations that we work with. In terms of a partnership level thing, again, kind of piggybacking what Steph said, we have a lot of project level TMF review meetings. We also have some higher level portfolio meetings. In some cases, we're conducting governance board meetings with customers as well. So, wherever we have the opportunity to strengthen that partnership and be transparent with the overall health and status of the TMF, we're making the most of those opportunities.
That's fantastic. How about you, Sarah? What kinds of things are you doing in your organization?
Yes, actually, over the last year, we've been trying to hone in and ensure we have a consistent delivery method of metrics to our clients. So we did update our TMF plan, as the rest of this group did, or make sure that it's documented there, that actually explicitly calls out what we do deliver and how frequently we will deliver it. So there are metrics that actually get sent out on just a weekly basis, which just is a general kind of pulse check to how submissions are coming in and just overall queries and issues that might be occurring. And then we have kind of a monthly check also that happens to ensure that on a monthly basis, we're just looking at, how many placeholders do we have? Have the reviews been done like they should be? Because our functional groups are expected to be in the TMF actively and looking at everything on a month-to-month basis to ensure that things maintain and are consistent and compliant, and maintain that steady state, Dawn, because I absolutely agree. It's inspection steadiness. We do, I think, also to Steph and JP, like we also have certain partnerships where we then escalate and have higher level metric reporting that we give. I don't think it's not really different metrics. It's pretty much the same that we would deliver at a partnership, but then we just roll it up and have just higher level conversations on those. So I think a lot of similarities I see across all of us, but probably the most important place is to document it in your TMF plan and ensure that that's clear and transparent with your sponsor of how you're delivering it.
That's great. So we do have a question that's going to go to JP and Sarah. I'm going to share it up here. As far as document filing and, how often it's, often it's distributed to functional leads, which makes sense, right? How do you avoid some of the TMF filing issues in a project where there's a very high turnover rate, meaning the functional leads, either CTM or PM, are often change? How have you seen that happen, and what are you doing to make sure the right people are being asked and be ensuring document is filed appropriately? Who'd like to take that? JP, Sarah?
Yeah, I can touch a little bit on that. So, I will say that a very high turnover rate, I haven't experienced that, but I've certainly seen, situations on projects where there is some turnover. So, generally there's other people on the project team that we identify in advance, knowing that there's going to be a change in personnel. So we try to proactively mitigate those issues so that there isn't a gap in TMF filing, or who's responsible for collecting documents from a particular functional area or site, whatever the case may be. But that's something we are notified through attending regular study team meetings with the overall project team, so that, you know, we're not left in the dark and then all of a sudden wondering like, oh, why are there so many documents missing for this? Well, that CRA or CTM left a month ago. So no, we try to kind of, you know, address those issues in advance.
Yep. Sarah, anything different?
Yeah, you know, so we do have TMF leads assigned to our projects, which are supposed to have a pulse on the projects as well, just in general across TMF. For our functional leads, truly regardless of whether or not there's a turnover, and I haven't necessarily experienced a high turnover in general across the company, but there are individual projects that sometimes just tend to have sometimes turnover. And it seems higher than most, but it's not necessarily across the company, but project specific. So the expectation is if the functions were keeping up with the process as they should, that it doesn't matter who comes in, they should be able to pick it right up from where they left off. But there always is going to be somewhat of a learning curve where it's expected that that new functional lead will work with their TMF lead in order to get caught up, understand what's happening, but really that lead being the pulse of that project and understanding what's happened. If, you know, maybe that functional group hasn't been as on top of the reviews as we would have liked them to be, so the new one can then pick up where they left off, or maybe do a full review of the TMF. But really, that lead to me is the guidepost for that functional group to know where to pick up.
Yeah, I really like that idea of having a TMF lead within the functional group, or a TMF liaison, whatever you might use that role, you know, who is, you know, point person for that, regardless of what's going on. And making sure that your TMF manager or your TMF lead has that list and has that information. And I think that tends to be, to me, one of the more critical things to make sure that you're keeping your CROs in the know of when there are differences and when there are changes. I do still have a few sponsors that are like, why does the TMF lead need to be on the study team meetings? And I have to explain why that is, right? And I think even within sponsors that has happened as well, that they're like, well, it's just the TMF, it's just the archive. But no, that's not what it is, right? It's your study management tool. So your TMF lead should be very integral in having those conversations. All right, I'm going to pivot us a little bit, you know, and move on to metrics, because we have quite a few questions on metrics. And yeah, and just maybe start out in general, and this may answer some people's questions already. You know, when you think of the pillars, you know, my favorite pillars of TMF, overall TMF quality being, you know, completeness, which I think is sometimes the easiest metric, timeliness and quality. Timeliness, I'm going to throw out there. I actually ranked this, I think, on the survey, not to put anyone's questions in there. I think timeliness is still one of the hardest things to measure effectively, right? You know, there's ways we do it. You know, what are some of your favorite ways to either measure that, or what does that metric look like? So we can start on either side here. I can start with, I'm going to pick on JP. You know, he's like, oh, she's a minute on. You know, what is some, you know, for any one of those pillars, what would be one of, you know, some favorite metric, or maybe even something different that you're doing that maybe you haven't seen across the board?
Yeah, I'll take on your timeliness pillar, Dawn, because I know that's your favorite. So yeah, I agree with you. It can be challenging. So we do try to measure timeliness in a number of different ways. Obviously, there's your point of collection of the document and how it's challenging to measure that, because if you're collecting, I know you've used this example in the past, a medical license from a site, date of collection is going to vary differently from the actual date of the document. So, you know, the eTMF system we use does allow us to capture the, you know, collection date or receipt date of the document. So we are considering using that functionality. We also do use timeliness in other ways. So from upload date into the system, how many days it takes to make it through the document processing lifecycle, things like that. So we have a few different ways to measure timeliness, but, you know, trying to pull all of that information together is still an ongoing effort by our team.
Sure. Jason, anything different you're doing to try to capture timeliness?
Yeah, so I think Regeneron might be a little bit unique. We So we actually have figured out a way to track timeliness on many classifications, specifically the date the document is finalized to the moment it makes its way into the TMF, which is the way that we think of as critical timeliness. Because how long is a document sitting on somebody's desks, like outside of the TMF? Now, like I think JP just mentioned with the medical license, or maybe it was Dawn, that's not something that you can track easily because it's reused. So our inventory list actually define at the classification level which ones we include in our timeliness and which ones we don't. And I would say it's somewhere in the ballpark of 65 or 70% we track for timeliness because they're not reused. And it's been really effective for us to identify late documents with kind of odd root causes over the years. And it's gotten us to a place where we're more timely than we were a few years ago.
Great. Anyone else? Anything different you've done?
So we actually take a very similar approach, Jason, as you guys do in Regeneron. I will say we're not as advanced as you guys are just yet. We're working through that list of document types and with date or what's the most important ones to include in that metric. But another factor that we've been bringing in is the actual looking at documents and events or milestones, depending on the system that you use. Because, for, site activation, for instance, the documents might have been collected, but they're sitting there until they have a full package and it's complete. So when you're starting a study to then look actually at the event of site activation and when those documents were expected to be in the TMF based on that event being triggered and completed. And then there's other documents that will come in throughout the study that we then want to look at more document dates in correlation to when they would have been collected and then submitted. So I'm kind of coming into the fact that it's not really going to be a one-size-fits-all approach anymore, really. I think in my past, it had to be one, it had to be this, it had to be that. Really, now that we have the opportunities through technology to use different methods of identifying when documents should come in versus when they actually are coming in, trying to have a blended approach to timeliness and allow us just a better way to truly see it based on the timing of the study and the documents that are being submitted. So we are not quite there yet, but it is a work in progress to move in that direction to have more of a blended way of measuring it.
And I love that, Sarah. I'm gonna piggyback off of that. And I was wondering, and I don't know, Steph, if you have thoughts on this too. The milestone-based, looking at records based on milestones. So that takes care of like the medical license. That takes care of maybe the investigator CV. If I say my date is maybe, site activation, probably before SIV or maybe some study startup milestone that you have within your system, when were these records in the TMF compared to that milestone date? And that's also another way to look at timeliness. It gets a little trickier when you look at ongoing and conduct, and that's when the document finalization date becomes important. But that variation and looking at what date is relevant for a timeliness metric, I think is important. And Steph, I don't know if I took your thunder, but I'll throw you in there if you want to add to anything else in this.
No, the way I love all this, and I definitely have implemented or worked with teams who have kind of this roll-up effect. So we have our overarching timeliness, right? And we can take out artifacts so they don't skew the timeliness. But we can also do, as you're talking about, consider this milestone based. And if we start a study startup and we kind of bring it down to a sub metric, we're starting now we're looking at our gaps. Why are things late? Is it just as they're sitting on somebody's desk, if they're not being collected, etc.? But so it's a two-way approach. We're seeing, okay, we have gaps, but it's also a learning curve. Maybe we need to go do some education or training within our teams from looking at these sub metrics on timeliness. Mm-hmm. So there's many ways to view it besides just TMF health.
I love that stuff. It brings me something near and dear to my heart as a QA person, root cause analysis. Yep. So really, let's look at what the root cause is of why these things are late and not just, put a one step fits all. One of the questions I think I'm going to send back to you, Jason, that I see around timeliness is, because you did mention submission timeliness, or a couple people did, how are you evaluating submission timeliness and what reference to calculate the timeliness of that document submission? So, how do we know, is that a manual date or is that, what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah. So We use two dates to calculate our upload timeliness. One of them is a system generated one, which is the created date. So it's whenever the document is put into the eTMF. That's the end date. The start date is the document date that gets filled in by the QC team, the TMF processing team at Regeneron. It is always the last action date printed on the document. That's our rule for every date we collect in the system. So if you have a letter with a signature date and a letter date, whichever one is first is the one that we're going to capture as that last action date.
Okay, great. How about anyone else, especially? I know you took some things out of your timeliness metric. Other folks, are you doing timeliness metrics on those other type of documents? And if so, how are you collecting submission data? Is anyone doing anything different?
Not quite yet, Dawn. Again, I think we're kind of in a situation similar to where Sarah might be, where we're still analyzing a lot of that and trying to figure out how to get to where Jason is. But yeah, it's something we're still looking at.
Great. Okay, good. All right. And then we just had, and I'm going to throw this out as a quick question, for TMF completeness, for your maybe tolerance limit. So this is a little bit different. They're putting green as 85, maybe 85%, 70 is orange, for example. What thresholds are you setting for expected TMF completeness? Does anyone have any magic numbers they want to share?
So I could start. I'm happy to share a little bit. The number actually changes over time. So throughout the study, we would like to see, depending on the level, so site level, we give a little more freedom of 80%, we consider green, anything over 80. For study and country level, it's anything over 90, but we won't lock the TMF until it's 95% complete.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any different numbers?
We measure it about 85% and above to be green. But I will say, again, as in our evolution to continue to improve how we're reporting metrics and our expectations, it's going to start changing, similar to what Jason said, where I want to really look at it in the phase of the project and understand the expectation. What events have recently occurred again to all of a sudden flood the TMF with a bunch of expected documents, and just really understanding some of that. But I do think having more of a site-based approach and then looking at the other documents that are more within the control of the CRO or the control of the sponsor is also where we need to go, just to ensure that we are fairly looking at completeness. Because I think right now to have a general blanket expectation is a lot of times unfair, because there is a lot of things that we need to take into consideration at the site level, that is completely out of our control, out of the CRA's control. And then things that are absolutely within our control when it comes to country and study, where we should be really, honestly, most of the time close to 100%, because those are things that we create and we execute and finalize and should be able to submit very quickly if we're actively managing our TMFs. So we have a standard right now about 85%, but it is going to be something we are adjusting and looking at in more detail.
Great. So I'm going to move on to completeness and EDLs, and then I do want to leave time to talk about actual oversight and move out of metrics here in a minute. But so there is a question. I'll go ahead and share it. It's a little bit of a long question. I don't know. Yeah, it's not going to share well. I'm going to read it. When you're thinking about your EDLs, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. How are you using that to help with completeness checks? So the question is, who's using expected document lists or whatever might be the term within your system, and how is that helping you with completeness? Does that make a difference? Does that really give you the number you're looking for? Where do you want to go? Steph, you didn't have a chance to talk on the last one. Do you want to?
No, it's totally fine. So yeah, for EDLs I think are incredibly important. They give us a a quick snapshot of the health of our TMF. But the really one big thing I wanted to point out is, if we don't readily manage our EDLs, then they won't be a quick snapshot, an actual visibility. I was actually just having this conversation yesterday with somebody saying, hey, listen, if you aren't regularly managing your EDLs on a consistent basis, then you're going to have challenges. Who knows? Maybe it says you have 5 protocol amendments in there, but theoretically there's 6. So it's a couple things. It's one, who is managing those EDLs? Is it somebody on maybe of a TMF team? Is that one person consistently looking at that at a quality review check? Is it another, maybe it's, you don't have a TMF team. Is it somebody within all of your functions that are spot checking each of their zones to ensuring that they have, their artifacts, to ensure that they have the appropriate EDLs in place on a consistent basis? It is vital to stay on top of those to ensure that you are getting the appropriate EDLs.
Yeah, good point. And I think that that's the key. They can be powerful, but they also can be a little bit cumbersome to keep up sometimes, right? Correct. And busy study teams don't always get there. So EDLs, for people that I did see this, expected document lists is some systems is what they'll call it, but there's other terminology that also is the same concept. You know, what are our expected documents at a particular time? When it comes to that, and I'm going to bridge this with our oversight question a little bit. When it comes to keeping up those EDL lists or those expected documents, how are you working with your CRO partners or CROs? How are you working with your sponsors to ensure that those numbers are accurate? What are some of the activities that need to happen? And, who's doing that on your teams? Is it a TMF lead? Is it a functional lead? Actually, Jason, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to move over to the CRO side really quick in a second.
Yeah. So you're absolutely correct. The EDLs are cumbersome, challenging. Study teams throw fits about it on a very regular basis. The TMF lead at Regeneron, I like to call them an air traffic controller. So they're not actually the ones doing the work, but they are coordinating with the study teams to make sure they complete their EDLs. I will say that our scorecard has a new category, a fourth pillar, as I like to say now, that we're adding, and it's called compliance. And one of the metrics there is the EDL workflow compliance, as well as our IRR workflow compliance. And in both cases, it's just to measure, are people really participating or not? Now, I will say this does not necessarily mean that the information they provide is valid, but at least we're seeing that they are running the workflows and hitting the buttons and completing things. So that's kind of where we're beginning to think about how do we encourage, quote unquote, people to do this a little bit more by adding a KPI for it. And then, we're hoping in the near future that we can use the fact that teams that have that compliance metric are better will see a better completeness score, kind of draw that correlation together for everybody.
Yeah, that's great. How about Sarah from the CRO side, or JP? How is it different? How are you ensuring that your expected document lists are up to date, or whatever tool you might be using to make sure you know what is coming in so you can measure completeness?
So I can speak. We're actually not using an EDL per se, but we have required placeholders and event managed placeholders, as well as manual placeholders. So we kind of are a hybrid approach at this moment, where it is our TMF leads triggering placeholders that are both required based on the structure and what has been agreed to with the sponsor that should be coming in and who is accountable for it. Then it's event-driven placeholders when these events occur, and we have mapped documents that we know then belong to those document types that belong to those events. So that triggers placeholders. But then there's just the ongoing reviews from our teams as they're going in and checking the TMF to add in placeholders that are identifying that might be missing that they don't actually have to collect or submit. Our want is not to create a placeholder just to have it. We want the documents to come into the TMF. But so that's where our functional teams then create the manuals in case, there's something at the site level they know is missing, but they don't have it in hand. That's then meant to be our indicator. We know we need something, it's missing, but here's our identifying marker, to say that it needs to be received and come in. So ours is a little bit of a hybrid at this point, using our leads and our functional groups. I've done it previously in the past where it's been managed more by our functional groups, which is just incredibly difficult. Like, just to Jason's point, like, just holding them compliant to doing that is just very, very challenging. And so I love the idea, Jason, of that compliance scorecard, because that is just TMF in general, managing compliance can be challenging. So I love that idea.
Sure. JP, anything you're doing differently?
I feel like I'm a little bit of everyone put together. So I know Sarah's pain with the placeholders. We have, again, it's dependent on the project and the sponsor we're working with, but we use placeholders in place of EDLs on several projects, in which case, our internal TMF team really performs more of the activities. And providing the reports, the dashboards on those outstanding items on a regular basis to those respective sponsors. But on the projects where we are using EDLs, I love Jason's analogy of the air traffic controller, because in that case, we are really just kind of overseeing all of the activities going on, and we're really just supporting, in most cases, the functional leads. It could be another CRO who's acting on the study as well, where we're just managing the TMF, but not actually collecting documents from the sites. Could be sponsor people as well, where we're generating the reports, sharing those on a regular basis. Like everyone has kind of said, all of those processes are challenging. So we're really just playing like a support role in there, guiding people on how to do those and getting them to understand the importance of managing them. So yeah, we have a fairly hybrid approach as well, similar to Sarah's situation.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And that is the challenge, right? Especially, and there was a question here, one about third-party vendors a little bit, one about CRO handling site documents that are maybe not in your sponsored TMF. So I'm going to throw out my other favorite new word is TMF repositories. Thank you, Lisa McKay, for that one. Where else are your TMF records being held, and how are you managing? I'm going to start with even some of the metrics or completeness. How are you managing completeness, quality, timeliness in those other repositories that may not be your system? And we all know that they're out there, and I'd be very surprised if anyone says it's all in their TMF, because it's just, there's safety systems, there's contract systems, there's the other vendor systems. How are you managing that? How are you ensuring that they're complete and that they're doing their reviews? So kind of bridging over into oversight a little bit. JP, do you want to continue on? Because we do something similar where we may be managing other CRO documents because we're only doing TMF.
Right.
Not doing a full service project. So that can happen.
Yeah.
How are we ensuring those other repositories are complete?
I will say in most cases, those are systems that we don't have access or oversight to because they're usually owned by the sponsor. So like you said, if it's a contracts system or a safety database where those records are, we try to work closely with the sponsor to ensure that they are reviewing the content of those systems. But it's difficult to capture that in our metrics because we're doing that through the TMF system, whether that be their TMF system or our TMF system. So I think for us, it's really just documenting it in the TMF plan, the TMF index, to make sure it's clear on there to an inspector and an auditor that those documents reside in a separate system other than the eTMF. And then just, keeping the communication lines open between us and them to make sure that the documents are actually ending up in those places or repositories.
Yeah,
fantastic. But it is a challenge, Dawn.
Oh yeah, 100% agreed. Sarah, anything different that you're able to do with those challenges?
I'd love to say that we do a lot of things different, but we don't. I think, it's much to JP, like if it's not in our repository, we really don't have the oversight. It really does for us depend on who is managing the vendor though. If it's a sponsor vendor, we kind of really do even say it in our plan that it's the expectation the sponsor is going to have that oversight, because we just can't. If it is a vendor that we are then contracted with, then we do take on a little bit more of that accountability to ensure that we are at least providing them reports. We're asking the questions to say, are you in fact doing it? This is your responsibility to ensure you're doing those checks, even though a lot of times we don't have access to their systems to then be able to actually physically go in and see things. We at least have the conversation and ensure we're providing them something so that that way they can have some better oversight. And that we know at least we've provided them the necessary tools to have the oversight necessary. But it really does come down to, for us, who holds the contract with that vendor. And then we ensure that we're delivering and having those connections and report delivery. we're not physically getting into their systems to have access. It is a different conversation we're having internally, though, when it's like our physical systems internally, where, right now we're talking about vendors, but to your point, Dawn, there could be, our safety documents might be housed within our safety system. So we don't yet have access to that. It's, again, a conversation we have with that function, and we hold them accountable to have and to ensure that they're meeting those expectations. But it is a level of oversight that we are also looking to build into our team for the systems that we then maintain also within a company. So it's kind of several different avenues. You have your external, you have your internal, and then, sponsor related ones too.
Great. Steph, as a sponsor,
Yep.
what kind of things have you done?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, it's kind of sometimes a little bit in the same remit as JP and Sarah. Although we're the TMF team and it should be under, I guess, our house or within our remit in some ways, it's truly not. It's within the functions. They own the systems themselves. So number one, how do we have oversight? We have to have some kind of oversight. So we document a QC process for alternative repositories, could be called alternative locations within your TMF plan. It's incredibly important. The one thing that I have found in my past experiences is sometimes a function may have their own QC process and they don't want to abide by the one that we put in place as the TMF team. So you have to ensure that you're engaging with each of your functions. When you roll out a new process such as oversight for alternative locations, find out, hey, what are you doing already? If you're doing anything at all. And if they say, nope, we're not doing anything at all, fantastic. Here's our process. It's going to be in the TMF plan, and we'll have most likely at every periodic review, you also need to verify within that process and document within that process that you conducted a QC of your alternative location. But if they choose to do their own, you also note that within your TMF plan, if maybe it's data management, they do their own within their own. They do their own QC process, but they still do document that at the time of periodic review. Maybe they provide you that documentation. So it's really, again, engaging with your functions to know what they're doing if you're developing a new process, but also maintaining those conversations. I will have to say I've been lucky in my past where it started off as I had multiple functions that had alternative locations and they followed our process, but I had one that did not. But over time, after we had many conversations, we were able to pull them in and engage them in our process to make it consistent. It simply makes it easier in the end, but of course, it does take a little time and a little convincing to get there with those functions to get out of their process and engage in ours. But at the end of the day, as long as you have it, one, documented in your TMF plan of who's doing what, and then two, you are showing that you have evidence that those QCs did occur both via your process as well as their own process, you should be, golden to show that you have that oversight.
That's great. That's great. I'm actually going to share up this question that I see, and I'm going to throw it first to Jason, and Steph certainly put in there, but I really like this one. How do you balance the need for detailed oversight with the CRO's autonomy in managing the TMF? So I think that's a great question to the sponsor, and I think it leads us very nicely that we're going to start talking a little bit about partnerships here in a minute. So Jason, if you'd like to kick us off with that, that'd be great.
Sure, happy to do it. Yeah, I think partnership is really the key word here, right? Like, it's really important that there's trust that especially the TMF group at the CRO, right? I think that as you get further away from the TMF, people care less and less about the TMF. But as long as that core TMF group is passionate and works with you and you trust them, I think there are opportunities to allow them to be more autonomous, right? You have to give them good guidance, good structure, and good expectations. But as long as you provide that up front, I don't see a reason why you can't let the CROs do some of that analysis, do that root cause analysis like we were talking about, right? One of the things that was critical when we put together our scorecard was that the CROs had to get direct access to the same exact metrics that we were seeing, because there's no way that you can allow for proper oversight if you don't allow them to see the tools that you're working with.
That's great. Steph, anything to add to that?
Yes.
Go.
So what I've done, I was in a situation where we had a multitude of CROs in place, and it got very challenging because they all had something a little bit different on what they needed. So we created TMF partnership plans by our team and their TMF team, and if they had one. Pretty much we were lucky, they all had one. But within those partnership plans, it allowed us to say kind of exactly what we were doing from every angle about the TMF, metrics, oversight, systems in place, document uploads, etc. And at the end of the day, we both signed off on that. So it gave them some leverage that we had to stick to the plan, and it gave us leverage that they had to stick to the plan. So like Jason was saying, it was building that trust. So we were able to speak the same language at the end of the day and expected what was to occur as a partnership moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's great. And one of the things, and JP, I'd love to hear you and Sarah's opinion on this. I think there's two pieces on that I heard from both, is building that trust, and also the other piece is setting clear expectations. Because certainly, as a vendor, those are the questions I'm always asking of my sponsor. What is your expectation? What do you need from us, and when do you need that? And then for us, I think it's really important, and we've gone back to it more than once, making sure that TMF plan, which should be a living document as far as I'm concerned, that TMF plan has that written down. So we agreed upon this, we signed off on this. And that way, if it's not happening, you also have a document to go back, to your partners on both sides and say, this is what we agreed to, and if it's not meeting the needs from a vendor side, well, what do we need to do to get there and still be realistic in what we have? For example, I do see a question, how often do you do quality reviews? I had a sponsor that wanted monthly quality reviews. I'm not kidding. I cannot make this up. So I really had to walk that back and said, okay, we can send you something monthly, but we're not looking at the whole TMF every month. Let's say we're going to look at a zone a month. We'll focus on a zone and we'll take a risk-based approach and look at that zone and make sure it's complete. And that was, again, an agreement we came to. We documented it in the TMF plan and everybody was happy. They said, okay, that's fine. As long as if we're looking at about 10% of the TMF and by 10 months, we've looked at nearly 100%, then that's great. Again, trying to keep those expectations there. JP, Sarah, anything different you've done with your sponsors that you want to share?
Yeah, I can go first on, I think one of the things that I'd like to highlight is that, obviously the TMF plan is, how we're planning to manage the TMF, but one of the things we include in it is also the things we expect the sponsor to do to contribute to the overall management of the TMF. That can be oversight activities or periodic checks or regular meetings with them. I did see a question pop into the chat about escalation pathways when certain things don't always head towards that green status in your overall health. So we have language in our TMF plan about what steps to take to address, review and resolve those issues. So again, we really try to get the sponsor involved in the overall, oversight and management of the TMF, for things that they should be aware of. And again, things like in terms of frequency, in terms of different reviews and things like that, it does vary from client to client. We've never been asked to do a full TMF review monthly, thankfully, Dawn, but I share your feelings on that.
I'll send you that client next time.
Okay.
JP, they're all yours. Sarah, we have a question up there, and I don't know if you want to go ahead and address this, because is the TMF plan the same as a partnership agreement?
Yes and no. I guess it depends on what in that specific instance what you're considering to be the partnership. If it's an individual project that you're partnering with somebody, then essentially it should be one and the same as your TMF plan. If you're talking about a portfolio of studies, then you really do want a separate agreement that outlines kind of your expectations of how you work with one another, which then should roll down into your TMF plan, your study-specific TMF plan, that will then either reference that document or refer to what you've agreed to within that separate partnership plan. I think probably the biggest thing here from a CRO's perspective, but also I've been on the pharma side as well, is to Jason's point, you have to have a trust and you have to build a relationship with your counterparts, within the sponsor or within the CRO side. As speaking from a CRO, I take very seriously when a sponsor has given us their project and that you have entrusted us to do that project. But I do ask, because you obviously have selected us for a reason, to give us a chance to follow our process and to, again, give the transparency and the metrics, all the metrics we talked about in the beginning of this panel, to be able to show you that we have it, we're going to have a hold of it. And it's not that it will be perfect, because no TMF is ever perfect, but that we will have enough oversight to catch those imperfections and create a plan to correct them. And then obviously try to ensure that they don't happen again, or we have, again, a good oversight of those things. So it is about building that trust and also giving that trust in the beginning to allow your CROs to do what they've been asked to do, which is to manage your project. And allow, I think having that transparency in the metrics up front and ensuring that there is that level of again, transparency across, either whether it's the CRO owning the system or the sponsor owning the system, that transparency allows that trust to flourish. Because if you start to be guarded with your metrics, if you start to be guarded with your access, it becomes challenging for either side to then really truly have that oversight and to be able to do what they've been asked to do. Whether it's a sponsor having oversight of the CRO system or whether it's a CRO working in the sponsor system, I've had it both ways. So, really, I think that crux is transparent communication and delivery of just oversight, but then also just building that trust as part of that transparency.
Yeah, that's great, Sarah. And we are at our 5-minute warning, so I'm getting pinged from the back room saying, okay, wrap it up, Dawn. But I want to thank our panelists here. I think I'm going to put a few words around partnerships that we talked about in our prep meeting that I think, we really did address. It's really around partnership. It's about integrating your teams when you can. So making sure that TMF team is part of the overall team, because again, that helps us, from everything there. And then my key thing is transparency. Sarah hit it on the head. No TMF is perfect. No, and in fact, my auditor hat would say, if I see perfection, I'm looking deeper, because I'm a little worried about perfection. And I'm going to leave these words, which are some of my favorite words too, is quality is about absence of errors that matter. And so that's really where our risk-based approaches are, and our QC and all our efforts are. If we're really thinking about what matters, what's most important in the TMF, then exactly, we're right there. So thank you very much for this. And I'm going to bring Oliver back on to wrap us up.
I'm back. Thank you so much for that panel. That was, you could tell by the number of questions and the chat that was unfolding that the content was just incredible. I've organized and attended tons of panels in my time, but this one was really, really fun to attend. And I feel like there was some golden nuggets for an hour. It was just like pure gold, and you could tell by the chat that people felt the same. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your knowledge, your experience, your perspective. It was incredible. All right. Thank you so much, panelists.